It all began with sound no one expects to hear deep in the quiet countryside. The rattle of unfamiliar car tires crunching along the gravel driveway of my secluded cabin. From the kitchen window, I spotted a shiny black SUV slowly pulling up, its tinted windows reflecting the early morning sun. Behind it, another car followed, a gleaming sedan with an unmistakable logo on the side, a local real estate agency. My heart skipped a beat. There had been no calls, no letters, no emails. Yet here were strangers stepping out with cameras, clipboards, and confident smiles as if they owned the place. That was the day my little slice of peace turned into a full-blown HOA nightmare. Because the sign on the sedan's door told me exactly what they were here for. Somehow, the HOA had decided my cabin, a home I had built with my own hands, on my own land, was for sale. And worse, they had apparently invited a realtor to show it without my knowledge or permission. The audacity hit me like a hammer. My property, my name on the deed, my sweat and years in every nail and board. And now, people I had never met were wandering up my steps like they were shopping for new curtains. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was war waiting to happen. The strange thing was, I had no idea this HOA even existed when I first bought the land. The cabin sat at the edge of a small lake community, technically just inside the border of their so-called management zone. I figured, at worst, I might get the occasional newsletter about holiday potlucks or 4th of July fireworks. I had no plans to mingle, no plans to join committees or bake cookies for the board. I wanted the cabin for one thing: peace. But peace doesn't last long when an HOA smells control. Within weeks of moving in, little letters started arriving in my mailbox. Your mailbox post is not regulation height. Please paint your shutters an approved color. Front-facing satellite dishes are prohibited. Each one signed with the same curt flourish: HOA Board, Lakewood Estates. I ignored them. After all, the cabin sat back in the trees, barely visible from the main road. I figured they'd give up once they realized I wasn't interested in neighborhood drama. But the HOA doesn't give up. And now, standing in my own kitchen watching strangers size up my porch like it was an open house, I realized just how far they were willing to go. I stormed outside, no word, just presence, and the realtors froze mid-step. The lead agent, a tall man with slick back hair and an overconfident smile, waved awkwardly like I was some curious bystander. He started to say something, then stopped when he saw my expression. Slowly, they retreated to their cars, but not before leaving behind a crisp white folder on my porch swing labeled Property Listing. Pending. Pending? By the time their engines faded down the road, my pulse was hammering. The HOA wasn't just pushing limits. They were crossing lines, and I was about to draw my own. That night, I dug out the heavy steel padlock from my shed and marched to the end of the long gravel drive where the wooden gate stood between my land and the road. The gate had been mostly symbolic until now, hanging open like a handshake to delivery drivers and the occasional hiker who got lost. Not anymore. The chain clinked loudly as I looped it to the post and snapped the lock shut. Then, with a can of bright yellow paint, I made my message loud and clear on a scrap of plywood. Private property, not for sale. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I planted the sign so it faced the road like a warning flare. No one would step foot here again without my say-so. But the HOA wasn't done. The very next day, a letter appeared in my mailbox, this one thicker than the rest, printed on fancy letterhead with the words violation notice screaming across the top. According to them, my gate restricted community access, and my sign was unapproved exterior signage. They demanded immediate removal. I laughed out loud. Remove it? After they invited strangers to my land? Not a chance. Days passed. Then came the HOA president herself, a sharp-faced woman named Margaret who always wore oversized sunglasses like she was hiding from paparazzi. She stood at the gate one afternoon, arms crossed, staring at my new sign like it was a personal insult. She didn't step foot past the chain, though. Something told me she knew better. But the war was brewing, and soon the HOA started flooding me with letters threatening fines, legal action, even community mediation. They claim my land fell under their jurisdiction, that my gate interfered with neighborhood aesthetics, and that my refusal to comply will result in escalating consequences. I kept every single letter, because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a gate or a sign. This was about control, about power, and about to become a battle bigger than any of us expected. Then came the day everything truly exploded. A carload of prospective buyers actually showed up despite the sign in the lock, expecting a tour. They said the HOA told them the cabin was temporarily off the market, but might be available soon. One of them even waved a flyer with a photo of my house on it. The HOA had gone behind my back again. That was the day I called a lawyer, because if the HOA won a fight over my cabin, they were about to get one, and the first shot had just been fired. If you think the HOA would back down after I locked the gate, you're dead wrong. They weren't finished. They were just getting started. The morning after I called my lawyer, the HOA came out swinging. A thick packet arrived in the mail, 47 pages, staple highlighted, stamped with legal-looking seals. Inside were phrases like non-compliance, mandatory mediation, and escalating fines. Every page screamed the same message, asterisk, we own you. But they didn't. Not even close. Because here's the thing about bullies. The moment you push back, they panic. And that's when they make mistakes. My lawyer, a calm man with a grin like he'd seen this movie before, read through the entire packet. Then he pointed out the golden ticket, a clause buried deep in the HOA bylaws that said they could regulate shared community property, but had zero authority over private lots unless explicitly stated in the deed. My deed didn't give them that power. Not even a little. Which meant all their letters, fines, and demands, legally meaningless. And I had the proof in writing. But the HOA wasn't going to roll over quietly. 2 days later, Margaret, the sunglasses queen herself, called an emergency HOA board meeting. They held it in the little community hall by the lake, a place usually reserved for potlucks and fishing tournaments. This time, though, they filled the room with clipboards, microphones, and every sour-faced board member in a 10-mile radius. And right in the middle of the room, a giant blown-up photo of my lock gate. They thought they were about to shame me in front of the whole neighborhood. They had no idea what was coming next. Asterisk. They ranted about community spirit. They raged about uniformity and property values. But what they didn't know was that I had already filed a cease and desist letter through my lawyer demanding they stop listing, advertising, or even suggesting my property was for sale. And here's the kicker. Every time they claimed otherwise, every time they sent out a flyer or talked to a realtor, they were racking up potential damages for harassment and defamation. My lawyer said it best. They keep this up, and they'll be paying you before this is over. But the HOA wasn't done throwing gasoline on the fire. Asterisk. The next week, they started a smear campaign. Suddenly, anonymous flyers appeared around the neighborhood claiming my cabin was abandoned, that it was bringing down property values. They even suggested I was behind on taxes. A complete lie. It was like living in a small-town soap opera written by people with too much free time and not enough common sense. But they weren't ready for what happened next, because I had installed cameras. Not little doorbell cameras. Real ones, with full audio, motion sensors, and night vision. So when a certain board member snuck onto my property one evening to peel off my private property sign, guess what? I got the whole thing on video. And the moment I sent that footage to my lawyer, things took a turn. Because nothing scares a power-hungry HOA like seeing themselves caught red-handed on camera. Asterisk. The board member got nervous. Margaret got nervous. Suddenly, the same people who'd been threatening me for weeks started talking about working things out. But it was too late for that, because the lawyer had a plan. A big one. He drafted a formal complaint accusing the HOA of harassment, defamation, and trespassing. He attached the video, the flyers, the fake property listings, everything, and then he sent copies to the county, the state HOA oversight board, and the local newspaper. If the HOA wanted a war, this was a nuclear option. But just when I thought I had them cornered, the HOA pulled one last stunt. A move so bold it nearly burned everything to the ground. Asterisk. Because the very next week, a demolition notice showed up taped to my gate. According to the HOA, my cabin was now a non-compliant structure subject to removal. Removal, as in tear it down. They were going all in. And now, so was I. The HOA tried to tear down my cabin. They thought they'd won. What happened next ended their little empire for good. The demolition notice slapped onto my lock gate was the moment everything changed. Up until then, it had been letters, threats, and smear campaigns. Annoying, yes. Infuriating, absolutely. But this was war in its purest form. They wanted a battle. What they got was their own destruction. Served them on a silver platter. My lawyer didn't waste time. The moment I sent him a photo of that demolition notice, he filed an emergency injunction with the county court. The judge granted it the very next morning, freezing any action against my property until a full hearing, which meant the HOA couldn't touch a single board, nail, or blade of grass on my land without risking contempt of court. And we weren't stopping there. Because here's what the HOA didn't know. That same week, the local newspaper ran a story about abusive HOA practices featuring, yes, my lock gate, my cabin, and their demolition notice, complete with quotes from my lawyer about harassment, trespassing, and illegal property listings. By the time the paper hit mailboxes, the whole town was talking. The HOA wanted power. Instead, it got the spotlight, and it burned them alive. Asterisk. Neighbors started showing up at board meetings demanding answers. People who quietly hated the HOA for years finally had a villain to point to, Margaret and her little circle of clipboard warriors. Suddenly, the board wasn't just fighting me. They were fighting their own community. Then came the day of the court hearing. The HOA shuffled in with binders full of fake violation notices and grainy photos of my gate, like they were building some grand case. My lawyer walked in with one thing. The video. The one where a board member trespassed onto my land to rip down my private property sign in the middle of the night. The judge watched it twice. Then he looked at the HOA's lawyer like he couldn't believe this circus had even made it to court. In less than 10 minutes, the case flipped upside down, and the HOA's world came crashing down with it. The judge ruled the HOA had no authority over my land, no right to list it for sale, and no power to demand I remove my gate or sign. But that wasn't all. He ordered them to cease all harassment immediately and pay my legal fees. Thousands of dollars. The room went dead silent. Margaret's face turned the color of week-old oatmeal. One board member actually put his head in his hands like the weight of the universe had just collapsed on him. And it had, because my lawyer wasn't done. Hook, line, asterisk, if you think the court ruling was the end. Oh, you're gonna love what happened next. Remember those neighbors sick of the HOA's nonsense? They filed a petition to remove the entire board for misconduct and abuse of power. Within a month, Margaret was gone. The board was dissolved. And the HOA that tried to sell my home, smear my name, and tear down my cabin? Finished. The new community association sent me a letter a few weeks later. A polite one. They promised no more harassment, no more fake rules, no more secret realtor tours. The cabin stayed mine. The gate stayed locked. The sign stayed up. And the HOA that thought they owned me? They didn't own anything anymore. So what's the lesson here? Simple. Stand your ground. Document everything. And never let a power-hungry HOA push you around. Because sometimes the only thing standing between you and freedom is a locked gate, a good lawyer, and the will to fight back. And if you loved watching the HOA get exactly what they deserve, hit that subscribe button right now. Because there are more stories coming. Bigger ones. Crazier ones. Stories you won't believe until you hear them here first.